The winter of 1866 came early to the Sierra Nevada, and with it came the whispers. They started in the Chinese camp at Cisco, California, where 1,200 men huddled around fires that seemed to give no warmth against the mountain's bite. The whisper spoke of accidents that made no sense, solid rock faces that collapsed without warning, tools that shattered in experienced hands, and shadows that moved against the light of the work lanterns. Ah Sing heard the whispers as he ladled rice into his bowl, the steam rising like incense in the thin mountain air. At 28, he was older than most of the workers, his hands scarred from 5 years of blasting through granite that the white bosses said was impossible to move. But Ah Sing had learned something in those 5 years that the bosses would never understand. The mountain was alive, and it was angry. "Another cave-in at Tunnel 6, muttered Chen Wei, settling beside the fire with his own bowl. His left arm hung useless at his side, crushed 3 months ago when a support beam had inexplicably snapped. "Third one this week. The Guaylo bosses are saying it's bad timber, but timber doesn't scream when it breaks," finished Ah Sing quietly, using the Taishanese dialect of their home village. Around the fire, other men nodded grimly. They had all heard it, the sound that came from deep within the mountain when the accidents happened, like the cry of some great beast in pain. The Central Pacific Railroad had hired them because they were expendable. Chinamen who worked for $1 a day while white workers demanded 3. They were given the most dangerous jobs, hanging from ropes over 1,000-foot cliffs to plant explosives, working through blizzards that killed lesser men, boring through granite so hard it dulled steel bits in minutes. But what the railroad bosses didn't know was that these men carried more than picks and shovels into the mountains. They carried 5,000 years of wisdom about dragons and spirits, about the proper way to ask permission from the earth before disturbing its sleep. "My grandfather told me stories," Ah Sing said, staring into the fire as if he could see the old man's face in the flames. "About the great dragons that sleep beneath the mountains in the Middle Kingdom. He said they were the backbone of the world, holding up the sky itself." "Fairy tales," scoffed Liu Ming, a young man barely 18 who'd arrived on the last ship from Guangdong. "We're in Gold Mountain now, not China. There are no dragons here." But even as he spoke, the ground beneath them trembled, not with the familiar rhythm of blasting, but with something deeper, more primal. The fire flickered, and for just a moment, the shadows around them seemed to take the shape of something vast and serpentine. Ah Sing stood, his decision made. "Tomorrow, I go to see the mountain for myself." The next morning, while the other crews prepared for another day of blasting, Ah Sing made his way to Tunnel 6. The entrance yawned like a mouth in the granite face, supported by massive timber beams that groaned under the weight of the mountain above. The air that flowed from the tunnel carried a strange warmth, as if something deep within was breathing. James Strobridge, the Central Pacific's construction superintendent, stood outside the tunnel entrance. His one good eye, the other had been lost to a blasting accident, studying the latest engineering reports. He was a hard man, but fair in his way. He'd been the one to convince the railroad to hire Chinese workers when everyone else said they were too small and weak for the job. "Ah Sing," Strobridge nodded as the Chinese foreman approached. "Heard you speak English better than most. What do your men think about these accidents?" Ah Sing chose his words carefully. Strobridge was one of the few white bosses who listened, but there were limits to what a Guaylo could understand. "Mountain is unhappy, Mr. Strobridge. We disturb something that should not be disturbed." Strobridge's scarred face creased in what might have been a smile. "You sound like my Irish grandmother talking about fairies and such. This is just geology, Ah Sing. Bad rock, unstable formations. We'll shore it up with more timber." "More timber will not help," Ah Sing said quietly. "Mountain does not fear wood and iron. Mountain fears only proper respect." Before Strobridge could respond, a shout echoed from within the tunnel. Both men rushed inside, their lanterns casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. 50 feet in, they found the work crew standing in a circle, staring at something on the tunnel floor. There, carved into the solid granite, as if the rock were soft clay, was a symbol that made Ah Sing's blood run cold. It was a dragon. Not the friendly, wise dragons of festival parades, but something ancient and terrible, its eyes seeming to follow the lantern light, its claws extended as if ready to strike. "How the hell did that get there?" Strobridge demanded. "This rock was solid yesterday." But Ah Sing was already backing away, his hand instinctively reaching for the small jade pendant his grandmother had given him before he left China. "We must stop work," he said urgently. "We must make offerings, ask permission." "We can't stop work," Strobridge exploded. "We're already behind schedule. The Union Pacific is laying track faster than we are, and if we don't get through these mountains before spring, the whole project could fail." "If we do not show respect," Ah Sing said, his voice carrying the weight of ancestral wisdom, "project will fail anyway. Mountain will make sure of that." That night, Ah Sing gathered the eldest and wisest of the Chinese workers around his fire. There was Chen Wei, whose grandfather had been a feng shui master in Guangdong. Old Wu, who remembered the stories his mother told about the dragon kings who controlled the waters and the earth. Young Lim, who despite his youth carried a scholar's knowledge of the old ways. "The dragon sign in the tunnel," Ah Sing began without preamble. "What does it mean?" Wu puffed on his long pipe, the smoke curling around his weathered face like morning mist. "In the old country, such a sign would mean we have awakened something that was meant to sleep. The dragons that live in mountains are not like the dragons of rivers and seas. They are older, more territorial." "But this is not China," protested Lim. "Surely the dragons of the Middle Kingdom do not extend their power to Gold Mountain." Chen Wei shook his head slowly. "Dragons are not bound by the maps of men, young scholar. They follow the bones of the earth itself. And these mountains," he gestured toward the towering peaks that surrounded their camp, "these mountains are very old, old enough to have their own dragons." "Then what do we do?" asked Ah Sing. "The Guai Lo bosses will not stop work for Chinese superstitions." "We do what our ancestors would do," Wu said firmly. "We make proper offerings. We ask permission. We show respect for the power that dwells in the deep places." "And if the dragon refuses?" Wu's eyes reflected the firelight like ancient amber. "Then we find another way. Dragons are not unreasonable, but they demand their due." The next morning brought news that made even Strobridge pause. During the night, every tool in the Tunnel 6 work site had been found twisted into impossible shapes, pickaxes bent into spirals, shovels folded like paper, drill bits melted as if by intense heat, though no fire had been lit. More disturbing still, the twisted metal formed patterns that hurt the eyes to look upon, symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when viewed directly. "Sabotage," Strobridge declared, but his voice lacked conviction. "Someone's trying to slow down the work." Ah Sing said nothing, but that evening he led a small group of workers back to the tunnel entrance. They carried offerings prepared according to the old ways: rice wine, incense, red paper inscribed with prayers, and a small jade figurine that Wu claimed had been blessed by a Taoist priest in San Francisco's Chinatown. As they approached the tunnel, the temperature seemed to drop 20 degrees. Their breath misted in the suddenly frigid air, and the shadows cast by their lanterns seemed to move independently of the light. But Ah Sing pressed on, his companions following with the quiet courage that had carried them across an ocean to build a railroad through impossible terrain. At the tunnel entrance, they arranged their offerings with careful precision. Wu lit the incense, while Chen Wei poured the rice wine onto the granite floor. Ah Sing placed the jade figurine at the center of their makeshift altar and began to speak in the formal Mandarin of ancient ceremonies. "Great dragon of the mountain," he intoned, his voice echoing strangely in the tunnel mouth. "We are humble workers from across the sea. We do not come to steal or destroy, but to build a road that will bring prosperity to all who travel it. We ask your permission to pass through your domain. We offer these gifts in token of our respect." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, deep within the mountain, something answered. It was not a sound that human ears were meant to hear. A vibration that seemed to come from the very bones of the earth. A voice that spoke in harmonics of stone and metal and the slow grinding of geological time. The jade figurine began to glow with a soft green light, and the symbols carved in the tunnel floor pulsed in response. When the voice finally formed words, they came not through the air but directly into the minds of the listening men. each hearing them in his own dialect. You show proper respect, children of the Middle Kingdom. But respect alone is not enough. This mountain has been my home for 10,000 years. Your iron road would pierce my heart, scatter my bones, wake me from dreams older than your civilization. What do you offer in exchange for such a violation? Ah Sing felt the weight of the dragon's attention like a physical force, pressing down on him with the accumulated mass of millennia. But he had not survived 5 years in the Sierra Nevada by backing down from impossible challenges. Great dragon, he replied, his voice steady despite the fear that threatened to freeze his tongue. We offer our labor, our skill, our very lives if necessary. But more than that, we offer to build your road as well as ours. Let the iron rails follow the path of your backbone through the mountain. Let the trains that pass carry not just cargo and passengers, but the memory of your power and the respect of those who know the old ways. The dragon's laughter was like an avalanche held in check, terrible and beautiful at once. Clever little builder. You would make my prison into my monument. But what of those who come after, who know nothing of dragons and care nothing for respect? What happens when your iron road brings those who would strip my mountains bare, poison my streams, drive away the spirits of forest and stone? Then we will teach them, Ah Sing said simply. We will tell the stories. We will make sure the old ways are not forgotten, even in this new land. Stories. The dragon's voice carried a note of something that might have been wistfulness. Yes, I remember stories. Your people have always been good at stories. Very well, little builder. I will allow your road, but on 3 conditions. The jade figurine flared brighter, and Ah Sing felt the dragon's terms burn themselves into his mind like brands. First, the tunnel must be built with proper ceremony. Every blast must be preceded by offerings. Every death must be honored with the full rites. The mountain will know if you forget. Second, when the road is complete, you will build a shrine at the highest point of the pass. Not a Christian shrine or a Buddhist temple, but something that honors all the spirits of this place. Dragon and deer, eagle and bear, the ghosts of the first people, and the dreams of those yet to come. Third, the story of this bargain must be told and retold, passed down through generations. Let no one forget that this road was built not by conquest but by covenant, not by force but by respect for the powers that dwell in the deep places of the earth. Ah Sing bowed deeply, his companions following suit. We accept your terms, great dragon. The road will be built as you command. Then let it begin, the dragon replied, and the jade figurine cracked down the middle, its light fading to a warm glow that seemed to settle into the very walls of the tunnel. But remember, little builder, I will be watching, and dragons have very long memories. The work resumed the next morning, but everything had changed. Ah Sing instituted new rituals that the white bosses dismissed as Chinese nonsense, but tolerated because the accidents had stopped. Before each blast, the workers would burn incense and pour rice wine on the rock face. When men died, and they did die, for the work was still dangerous beyond imagining, their bodies were treated with elaborate ceremony, their spirits honored with prayers in a dozen dialects. Strobridge noticed the change immediately. Whatever you did, Ah Sing, keep doing it. We've made more progress in the last month than in the previous 3. But Ah Sing knew the real reason for their success. The mountain was helping now, guiding their explosives to the weakest points in the rock, warning them away from unstable formations, even providing shelter during the worst blizzards. The dragon kept its bargain, and the workers kept theirs. The hardest test came in the winter of 1867, when a blizzard trapped the entire crew in the high camps for 6 weeks. Food ran low, then ran out entirely. Men began to talk of eating leather, of drawing lots to see who would sacrifice themselves for the others. But on the darkest night, when hope had nearly died, Ah Sing led a group of volunteers into the storm. They found the dragon's gift in a sheltered valley that hadn't been there the day before. A grove of fruit trees heavy with peaches and pears. A spring of clear water that ran warm despite the freezing air. And caves stocked with preserved foods that tasted of home. The workers survived the winter, and when spring came, the grove was gone, as if it had never existed. By 1869, the Central Pacific had punched through the Sierra Nevada, and was racing across the Nevada desert toward its meeting with the Union Pacific. The Chinese workers had carved 15 tunnels through solid granite, built bridges across impossible chasms, and laid track through terrain that engineers had declared impassable. At Promontory Summit, Utah, when the Golden Spike was driven and the Transcontinental Railroad was complete, Ah Sing stood with his surviving crew and thought of all those who hadn't lived to see this day. More than 1,000 Chinese workers had died building the railroad, their bodies buried in unmarked graves or shipped back to China in wooden boxes. But their sacrifice had not been in vain. True to his promise, Ah Sing used his savings to build a shrine at Donner Pass, the highest point of the railroad's crossing of the Sierra Nevada. It was a simple structure, built of local stone and timber, but it incorporated elements from many traditions: Chinese dragons and American eagles, Buddhist prayer wheels and Christian crosses, Native American symbols and Irish Celtic knots. The railroad officials tried to have it removed, calling it an eyesore and a fire hazard. But somehow, every crew sent to demolish it found their tools mysteriously broken, their equipment inexplicably malfunctioned. Eventually, they gave up, and the shrine remained. Ah Sing lived to be an old man, working first as a section foreman on the railroad he'd helped build, then as a merchant in San Francisco's growing Chinatown. He never married, dedicating his life instead to keeping the promise he'd made to the dragon. He told the story to anyone who would listen, to Chinese immigrants fresh off the boats, to railroad workers maintaining the tracks, to tourists riding the trains through the mountains. Some believed him. Others dismissed his tale as the ramblings of an old man who'd spent too many years breathing granite dust and nitroglycerin fumes. But the shrine at Donner Pass remained, and sometimes on clear nights when the moon was full, travelers reported seeing a great serpentine shape moving through the mountains, following the path of the railroad tracks, like a dragon swimming through stone. The story spread and changed in the telling, as stories do. Some versions made Ah Sing a powerful sorcerer who commanded the dragon through magic. Others claimed the dragon was actually the spirit of a Chinese emperor, cursed to guard the mountains until his people found prosperity in the New World. A few insisted that the whole thing was just a metaphor for the struggle between old ways and new, tradition and progress. But in San Francisco's Chinatown, in the camps where Chinese workers still gathered to build America's infrastructure, in the quiet moments when old men shared rice wine and memories, the true story was preserved. They told of Ah Sing, the bridge builder, who understood that some things were more important than schedules and profit margins. They spoke of the dragon's bargain and how respect and courage could overcome even the most impossible obstacles. And sometimes, when the trains passed through the Sierra Nevada in the deep of night, passengers reported strange dreams. Visions of a great dragon swimming through stone, its backbone formed by steel rails, its breath the steam of locomotives climbing impossible grades. In these dreams, the dragon spoke of bargains kept and promises honored, of the price of progress and the value of remembering where you came from. The Central Pacific Railroad became part of the Southern Pacific, which became part of other railroads, bought and sold and merged until few remembered the names of the companies that built the original line. But the tracks remained, carrying freight and passengers across the continent, following the path that Ah Sing and his crew had carved through the dragon's backbone more than a century ago. And at Donner Pass, the shrine still stands, weathered by time and storms, but somehow never quite falling down. Railroad workers still leave offerings there, not because they believe in dragons, they'll tell you, but because it's tradition. Because the old-timers say it brings good luck, because some things are worth preserving, even if you don't fully understand them. On quiet nights, when the wind blows through the mountain passes and the rails sing with the memory of countless trains, you can still hear the dragon's voice if you know how to listen. It speaks of bargains honored and promises kept, of the price of building something that will outlast your own brief life, of the wisdom that comes from understanding that you are not the first to walk this path, and you will not be the last. For in the end, that's what Ah Sing learned in the mountains of the Sierra Nevada, that the greatest engineering feat is not moving mountains, but learning to work with them. That the strongest foundation is not built on rock alone, but on respect for the powers that shaped the rock. And that the most enduring monuments are not made of steel and stone, but of stories passed down from one generation to the next, carrying the memory of those who came before and the hope of those yet to come. The dragon's backbone still runs through the heart of the Sierra Nevada, carrying trains and dreams and the endless human desire to connect distant places with ribbons of steel. And somewhere in the deep places of the mountain, an ancient spirit keeps watch, honoring a bargain made in darkness and sealed with respect, ensuring that the road built by courage and sacrifice will endure as long as the mountains themselves.